Hello and welcome back. This video is going to be all about trauma. So let's talk about trauma. When we hear the word trauma, we think about really bad things that have happened to people, like abuse, abandonment, or even witnessing somebody die. And you're right, these are certainly traumatic experiences. But these experiences are actually classed as big T traumas. And those are the ones that are easy to spot. Everybody can pretty much figure out what a big T trauma is. There are also things called little t traumas. And it's this form of trauma that goes unseen. So what is a little t trauma? There are a lot of them. It could be things like growing up in a household where there was constant fighting, or having an ill parent, or being bullied and shamed as a child, or having an overly critical parent, or seeing your parents fight all the time. All of these things that happen in your childhood are little t traumas. And just because we've used the word little and big, that doesn't mean that the effect is any different. Trauma is still trauma. It still affects your mind and your body, and you carry that with you well into adulthood. Think of trauma as a wound of the mind. Every time you touch that wound, it hurts. You feel pain. That is essentially what being triggered means. It means that your mental wound is being touched and you're feeling pain. But what happens is that you react to that pain. And how we react is really dependent upon the person. Some of us like to pretend that pain is not there, and we suppress our emotions, and we try and get on with life. While some of us just have these random outbursts of anger. Some of us like to pretend that that pain is not there. And we do whatever we need to medicate ourselves so that we don't feel that pain anymore. But essentially, we're just plastering up a really big wound. While there are others who might lash out and go on to hurt other people, often in the same way that they themselves were hurt. Until we heal that wound, we will keep reacting. We will keep repeating that behavior. Now think about it. What happens if you don't treat a wound? It becomes infected. Now trauma, the wound of the mind, is not that different. If left untreated, it will start to infect everything else in your life. And it can even go on to infect your body. Trauma can actually lead to physical illness, and most of us do not see that connection between mental and physical health. So many of us suffer from sudden health issues like high blood pressure, gut health issues, migraines, or more serious things like inflammatory diseases or autoimmune conditions. Many of these illnesses can actually be related back to trauma, either in your childhood or in recent times. So question yourself. Do you really believe that you've had no trauma in your entire life? If you really do have no trauma in your life, I envy you. But seriously though, it's important for us to assess our childhood and our life as a whole and deal with the traumas that we have faced. Almost every one of us has dealt with some form of trauma, whether it be a big T trauma or a little t trauma. And if we don't deal with that trauma, if we do not heal that wound, it is going to continuously cause problems for us throughout our lives. You cannot get away from it. You cannot ignore it. You cannot pretend it is not there. And I know that it seems easier to pretend that it's not there, and it can feel overwhelming just opening the door and trying to heal that part of you that is hurt. Nobody wants to feel pain, but the thing about trauma is that it needs to be processed in order for you to heal. There is no other way out. You either deal with the pain of the wound or the pain of dealing with the wound. And at least if you're dealing with healing the wound, you know that that pain is eventually going to subside. Whereas if you pretend that it's not there, it's going to keep coming up all the time. And that's actually worse. There are so many ways that unhealed trauma can show up in your life right now. If you are someone who was bullied or teased as a child, now as an adult, you probably have things like social anxiety or even fear of rejection. If you grew up with a parent who expected perfection from you, now as an adult, you probably have a real fear of ever making a mistake. If you grew up in a high conflict household, now as an adult, you probably avoid conflict at all costs and end up suppressing your own emotions and your own needs. These are just a few examples of how trauma can affect you now as an adult and continue to affect you if you do not heal those wounds. So your obvious question to me is going to be, well, Yogeshni, how do we heal the trauma then? And the answer should probably be obvious. Something that I've said in almost every video that I've posted so far. Counseling. You have to talk about it. In order to heal, you have to talk about the things that you have gone through, the trauma that you've experienced. Talking about it serves two purposes. One, it actually makes you voice the emotions that you are feeling on the inside. For a lot of us, we suppress our emotions for years on end. We're so afraid to even say how we feel because we're afraid of how it's going to affect others, or we're judging ourselves for having that emotion. Everyone has emotions. Emotions are not bad. It's the way you react to certain situations. There's no need to feel bad for emotion that you had. Emotions are there to be expressed. Once you have expressed it, that emotion is then gone. And the second point of talking about it is self-awareness. A lot of times we don't realize how deeply we have been impacted by these traumas in our life, whether they have been little traumas or big traumas. They have had impacts on our lives over decades, and it's only now that we're becoming aware of that fact. Self-awareness is so important. It's really the first step to healing. If you understand that something is wrong, then you will be able to fix it. But if you continue pretending that there is nothing wrong, you'll never be able to fix it, and you will continuously feel that pain. You will continuously feel unwell. You will continuously have to deal with that trauma showing up in places that you least expect in your life. Unhealed trauma shows up most of the time in our closest relationships, and that's often with our spouses or with our siblings or our parents. When we have trauma that is unhealed, we tend to lash out with our closest loved ones. There are so many people in relationships today that are struggling so much, and they can't understand why the relationship is not going well, or they can't seem to make any relationship work. Often it's because they have trauma that they have not dealt with. Things like fear of abandonment is something that shows up in relationships, particularly romantic relationships, so much as an adult. We start reacting in certain ways without realizing we're reacting in those ways. You have to remember that trauma, particularly from your childhood, means that you have adopted certain thinking patterns, and your mind will constantly go through those thinking patterns every time it feels like you're in that situation again. And you might be thinking, okay, if I experienced abuse as a child, I'm not being abused right now, so why would I be reacting in the same way? Because triggers can be anything, really. There are so many things in your life today that can trigger you without you realizing it. And then you're feeling as though you're reliving the abuse that you experienced in your childhood. You're going down that same thought pattern. You're reacting to it because you haven't healed that wound yet. So really think about it. Think about your own life. Think about the traumas that you've experienced, and whatever you're going through right now, perhaps that is related to some form of trauma that you've experienced through your life. I highly encourage you to take the time to do the inner work on this. It will be of so much benefit to you, not just today, but even for the you 50 years from now. I hope that this has helped you in some way, shape, or form. If at the very least it's made you understand that trauma is real. Trauma is something that has happened to almost every single one of us. And just because it has happened to us, it does not mean we are a victim. We can heal. We can go on to live much better lives. So do not ever feel that because you've experienced trauma, you are somehow less of a person. No, you have the opportunity to better your health, to better the health of your mind and your body. Take that opportunity. And I hope I have motivated you to do so. I will see you in my next video. Bye for now.